How you doing, everybody? Welcome to the channel and our new podcast series where I invite my friends to discuss RPG topics, and this is going to be awesome. At least I think it will. What do you guys think? You think it's going to be awesome?
Sure. It's going to be great.
It's great. Great, of course. All right, so we have three of my friends here today. We have Steve. Say hello, Steve.
Hello.
And Nick.
Hey.
And Kate.
Okay.
All right, so today's topic is going to be about new editions in role-playing games. Since D&D is dropping a new edition, I thought this would be a good current hot topic to jump on and have a discussion, because there's other games as well coming out with new editions, and some people like it, some people don't, and it's a good thing to discuss, and we'll just see where it goes. All right, so diving right in, the first question will be, I have a little list of questions. If you see them always looking down, I did bring a list of questions just to keep us on track here. So, then, is there a need for a new edition? So my first question to you all, and myself, which we're going to discuss, do you think the community's voice should have a significant influence on new editions? Or should the designers lead the charge because they know what's best? So how important do you think it is that the community decides when a new edition is needed? Or should the game designers, do they know best and should they just run with it? What do you guys think? You have an opinion on that?
I think in the current environment where developers can easily reach out to like their player base online through like different checks, I think feedback's more important than it was previously. So going forward, I think that's a big factor.
Oh, I think that people are both very good at seeing the niche applications of things. Like a lot of the D&D discourse is like, does this spell work this way? And if so, is that really broken? And sometimes you can end up with like one class being very strong and like essentially your power gamer, and another class being like, you know, feeling like they're pulling down the team. So I think getting a balance and new additions can sometimes help level a playing field if it's gotten too tipped.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you have 2 cents worth there, Steve?
I don't know. I think the community is obviously the people playing it, and they're the ones that, you know, really want to know if they want something new. But if you're like me at all and you're kind of stuck in your ways and you really like something, then anytime somebody says something new, you're like, nah, I don't want that. So.
Yeah, and why I said at the beginning, it's not just D&D. There's also an Alien RPG coming out, and I feel like that's an example of the company wanting to put out a new edition, whereas it seems like the fans don't. Now, there are some that are all for it, but I'm in an Alien RPG group for like the more official, unofficial one on Facebook, and the new edition, it's been 5 years, which I believe, Nick, me and you talked about it a little bit, but 5 years seems like a decent time to come out with a new edition. For us, it'll be the second edition of the game, but the online community seems pretty triggered by it. They feel like the game flows well mechanically, it doesn't need any changes, they're happy with it. But a lot of people are like, hey, that new Alien movie came out, so now let's drop a new edition and jump on, you know, just make people buy new things, right? So, I don't know. It's hard to say. Like, you know, sometimes the company may be right, maybe they know when the new editions need them, maybe not, I don't know. Can you guys, do you have anything else to add before I move on?
I was going to say, like, in terms of, like, releasing new editions, there'll be a lot of factors for it. I'm sure, like, you know, some corporations see it as a way to buy more products. But sometimes the developers, especially after a first edition, may see areas of improvement. Sometimes they notice it themselves. Sometimes it's feedback from players. You know, Alien RPG may be a prime example. I've played that. I think the rules are great. But maybe the developers, after 5 years, which is a decent amount of getting playtime under your belt, they've seen ways to improve it and streamline the experience. From what I've heard, that seems to be their intent, but hard to say until we actually see what the second edition brings.
Okay. Yeah.
The new edition's going to get more players or newer players, then I think it's a good idea.
Yeah. Yeah, and it does help some people, like, you know, if you know a new Alien movie's coming out, for example, and you're walking through the hobby store, and then you look on the shelf, and it's like, the new edition of Alien just dropped. You're like, hey, I can get in on it from the ground floor, you know? As opposed to being like buying a book that's old. Because they just had a big sale where they were putting all their products on, like, you know, half off or something. And a lot of people were like, hold on, you just announced a new edition's coming out, and you haven't stated, you know, whether the old stuff will be compatible or not. And it's like, do I invest in all the campaign modules and stuff, and I don't know. That's one thing to keep in mind, I suppose. All right, let's go on to something else here. So, how do new editions make games more accessible to beginners? And should they focus on that, or should they cater to the existing loyal fans? So, how do new editions...
When it comes to D&D, I started at 3.5. If you guys ever played the 3.5 D&D, and that was my first intro to it. And my friends brought me in, and it was just a lot of math. You know, I was dual wielding as a ranger, and I had minuses to one hand, pluses to another, different weapons, and every time it came to my turn, I was just dumbfounded. That was my intro to the game, but I liked the idea of the fantasy role playing. When I started 3.5, I only got one campaign about halfway through when 5th edition was released, and just bought the 5th edition Player's Handbook. It was so much easier to understand. And the guys, they were a little hesitant, but that's because they've been playing 3.5 for so long. I was new. I saw the 5th edition rules. It made everything super simple for me. And when we all switched, I just thought it was a lot easier as a new player at that time.
Yeah, and from what I've heard, 5th edition was designed to give you that experience. Like, compared to previous editions of Dungeons & Dragons, it was designed to simplify the character creation process, the rules mechanics, so it would be much more streamlined. I mean, even at the point of its inception, you can, like, make a character within, like, 10 minutes and start playing right away. And that was really what I think led to D&D 5e's massive appeal in the past decade, because it's so easily accessible.
Yeah, my very first game was played in Pathfinder, and I rolled for my health, and I got 3, and it was very challenging. And you had to roll to confirm criticals. Like, it was a lot, and I was new, and the people that were walking me through it were great. They had 4 or 5 new players, and it was super awesome. But then, like, sliding into, like, some of the D&D media was out, and then sliding into 5e felt like I didn't need someone to handhold me as a new player, which was pretty awesome. And then from there, like, your creativity and your DM is kind of your guidelines for where you can go.
Yeah, I've only played a little bit of Pathfinder, but I think that's like the older, crunchier version of D&D, isn't it? It's like there's a lot more math involved, right? Is that fair to say?
It is. Like, Pathfinder took a lot of its inspiration from 3.5, because after 4th edition D&D, which you don't hear a lot of people talk about, as it was initially poorly received. Doesn't mean it's bad, but initially poorly received.
It's very different, yeah.
Yeah, Pathfinder came out of people who want to continue and adding more content for 3.5. So that's where Pathfinder came from. I have not played Pathfinder 2nd edition yet, so I cannot comment on that specifically. This is just 1st edition.
So how important do you guys think backwards compatibility is? So do you think it's better that they, like, when a new edition comes out, that they wipe the slate clean and then rebuild it from the ground up? Or do they just make minor changes that are close enough that things can be backwards compatible? Or do you think it's okay for them to change the rules enough where it kind of like breaks the old books? Like, if the old books had stat blocks that now you're like, well, a lot of those stats, like armor class, is no longer the same, or whatever. Like, and then all the content you bought in the previous edition suddenly is broken. Like, how important do you think it is to keep that backwards compatibility?
I think it's very important.
Yeah,
I hope so. Anyway, for me, because I did purchase all the content for 5e. I'm maybe 2 or 3 books short of having the full collection, so I'm hoping some of that stuff in there, because there are so many different combinations of classes and races, and I have a character created in my head for all of them, and I still want to try them out. So yeah. I'm going to want to bring some of that to the new edition. If they have to be modified a little way, I just hope it's not too difficult to do.
But what about, you think, like, if it wasn't D&D related, because I'm pretty sure that it's going to be backwards compatible with the new one, at least close enough to you'll be able to tweak it. But what about if it was a system like a different RPG, I don't know, some other fantasy game, and you knew that the new edition came out and it would break the PCs or NPCs creation process of the previous edition? Is that a huge turnoff? Was that a deal breaker for buying it, you think?
I guess it's hard to say. Like, I know, as Steve has mentioned, the new edition, I think being backwards compatible is a good appeal for me. But sometimes I could see it, especially in the past, it could be a hindrance. If you're relying so much on what's already there and you're afraid to innovate, then you wouldn't be able to introduce or streamline the game. Like prime example, anyone who's played older in D&D know what THACO is. I am so glad THACO is gone and the different calculations for determining like armor class. Because if they stuck to like we can't lose THACO, it's a mechanic in the game, but by losing that and changing it in future editions, the games may become more successful. But because of that, nothing that involved THACO you can't play with fifth edition. So that's just a prime example. But right now in this climate, I think backwards compatibility is more important because I feel supplements and content is being produced at a higher rate than it was in previous like decades.
True.
So people who have a big investment in it, like if you've, I know we mentioned D&D a lot, but this is in general. I'm just saying that Wizards over the past years released like 4 or 5 new supplement books every year. If you've been, and they were still doing it earlier this year, knowing a new edition would come out. They did have the mindset that they were going to be bringing in this new edition, even if they don't want to call it a new edition, out. But they wanted to make sure it was backwards compatible so people would continue to buy the products and knowing that they're not going to be obsolete in another 6 months after the edition comes out. So right now, I think backwards compatibility is essential.
Yeah.
I think in part what you want to look at is if you're making something that's so removed from the original, just call it something else. Like create something else, make it a new RPG. Like there's lots of room. People are willing to take these on. Like it is not a climate where people aren't interested or actively looking for things. Like you can see Kickstarters for people with great ideas. So if you've got a great idea, maybe don't like make it something that exists part 2, the entirely different thing. But if you've got a great idea that's going to change, like to Nick's point, THACO to make something like a bit more engaging, turns a little quicker, then, you know, like it depends on like the spirit of your overhaul. If it's 100% overhaul, that's a new idea. If it's, you know, 30% of it, then you're streamlining or like focusing in on like what you think players want or enjoy.
Yeah, and my 2 cents on this just popped in my head because I looked up at my big wall of Warhammer 40k models. Warhammer Games Workshop is the worst for that. Now, it's still a tabletop game, so it's not a role-playing game. Even though there is a Warhammer tabletop role-playing game. Anyways, what I was going to say about backwards compatibility, they drop like a new edition like every 2 or 3 years, and it's not backwards compatible. And like somebody like me, I collected multiple armies, and I would buy like 4 books for $60 a piece, plus the rule books for like $100, and I wouldn't even get a chance to basically get some of the models off the shelf and start to use these books and open them and use them. And then they're like, oh, 7th edition's out, 8th edition, we overhaul the game, and every time they overhaul it, change the mechanics, and nothing's backwards compatible. And so they did that like for the last 10 years I was in the hobby, and every time you have to go and rebuy everything in order to use your minis. And like it's one of the biggest frustrations, and there's in that. So I can see when you do it, if you do it in RPGs, like you said, maybe it is best to be like, if you're going to change it up too much, just come out with a new game. But then when you got a brand, it's hard to do that. You know, you're like, hey, people know the name, you know, Pathfinder. So it's like, do we really want to create a new game because we're changing a bunch? I don't know. It's a good discussion point, though. So I like this question. So when a new edition releases, how much should the lore and setting evolve, or is that not important for a new edition? And I'll start with this one because this will be the last I talk about 40k, but Warhammer. But what I do like about Warhammer 40k is with every edition, there's a huge lore increase. So what happens in the universe increases. So the core book intro will then kind of like put all the stuff. So if it's 7th edition, whatever the lore was for the first 6 editions is like summarized, and then they get into the new fluff, how the universe is evolving. So with each edition, the galaxy's moving forward, the races are who's at war, what's happening. So I really like that part of it. Each new edition, you're like, oh, you know, what's happening? How is the story evolving? So I thought that was cool. But RPGs don't really do that a lot, at least from what I've seen, because the story is kind of left up to you to make and evolve in whatever world you create. But I guess if you're following in like the Forgotten Realms or a particular setting, then how important do you think it is that to be like, hey, particular key characters are now dead, or kings or queens or whatever, you know?
I think new lore is one of the few things that'll draw me out of my old comfort zones to let me explore something new. I love new lore with a little sprinkle of Easter eggs of old stuff tossed in. But anything to learn about new worlds, new backgrounds, new gods, new heroes, new villains. That's interesting, and that makes me want to explore a new place. So I'll definitely hop into any RPG with a new lore just to see. But then if somebody's like, "All right, you're in your new world," and they pop in a little bit of somebody that you used to know, or these are the bones of an old hero that we discovered that was from the old lore, then yeah, I like that too.
You like it sprinkled in.
Yeah, sprinkle Easter egg here and there. Yeah,
But do
yeah.
you think it'd be cool if they, like, say for a D&D example, since it's the goat of RPGs, um, do you think it would be a good idea for them to create like a their own world and then say with each edition that like this is how it's progressing, these are things that are happening, the factions here are now in power, and in the next edition they lost that power? And do you think that people would be more inclined to buy source materials on particular guilds or factions if they knew that they were changing each edition, and like bring more of like, I guess, canon lore into it? Or is it better for RPGs just to leave it open to whatever the GM or DM wants to do? I don't know.
I think with D&D specifically, since that's what we're mostly talking about with editions, um, the mechanics themselves aren't tied to a specific setting. The Forgotten Realms is the like current base setting, but and they do expand on the lore, and there are going to be some Forgotten Realms supplements coming out next year. They've already mentioned some 2 new source books, so that tends to be how they add more and flesh out the lore of the various settings. But D&D, there are multiple settings. You've got your Eberron, you've got your Dark Sun setting, you've got so many different setting books, and I do think that's very appealing, where you can see that you can take these base set of rules and apply them in so many different ways. And even when it comes to like character creation, like a common race like an elf or a dwarf, and how they are seen in all the different settings. And I find it's really appealing where if you just really like dwarves, for example, see how they function in this society compared to another society in a different setting. And adding to that and adding more lore is always appealing.
I'm kind of on the other side of this, but it's because I think I have less time playing than both of you. But it's sometimes a lot. You're like, okay, this person was this person, but then they were this person in this edition. And like generally and when in my home games, I tend to cater to like the worlds that my players like, and they tend to like kind of a personal centric world. So sometimes like trying to shoehorn them into a world, they just really kind of fight against it. Like they're like the mass lords of Waterdeep should be slaughtered. I'm like, you can't do that. And they don't like that. So it's kind of harder for that for me to sometimes put them in a setting where they just don't like how the rules work.
Yeah.
Yeah, just sort of add, like, I think that's sort of like something difficult when you're playing an established setting, trying to see like how faithful am I going to be to this setting in my own game? Like, am I going to break it, or am I going to make sure this is as canon as possible? And there's pros and cons to both, because if you don't break the lore, then you can say this story is canon, which is appealing, but you can really throw something in there as a curveball that the players don't expect. Like maybe a major event, like a major location or NPC, is like taken out entirely, and that shows you how real the stakes are. But I think each of those is dependent on your game. What's appealing for your players, for the overall narrative that you want to tell with your game. And I think settings, their primary goal is giving you a nice base bone. The settings purpose, I find, is if you don't have an idea off the top of your head, but you want to be a game master, take an existing setting, use it as a base, but feel free to change it if you want. No one's going to come and tell you that you can't run the game you want because this NPC is supposed to survive and you've killed them in your game and now you've broken canon. No one's going to hold that against you.
Yeah, it's like you're playing a Lord of the Rings RPG, and you're like, "What do you mean that Urkhai or whatever killed Gandalf?" You're like, "That can't happen," Or like some goblin arrow takes out Gandalf. You're like, "This is bullshit," But it also got me thinking, like, it's tricky when you're talking lore and stuff too, like, because like we recently played Tiny Supers, where I made my own city and my own superheroes, but it would have been a completely different game if we were like, I got you to make Marvel characters like in the Marvel universe. So like if you made your own superhero and then suddenly I spin in Spider-Man and I use him wrong, or he gets his ass beat by somebody like you're like on the level of the Shocker and you just kick Spider-Man's ass, or whatever. It can, that might take people out of it too. But so yeah, that's a whole different video. We'll have to get into settings and lore some other time. Getting a bit off topic here now, but anyways, so. This is just a real quick one we can all just kind of quickly answer, I guess. Is there a point where you think too many new additions start to fatigue the fan base? Or do they just breathe new life into a game and more excitement?
Oh, no, if I was just a short answer, I'd say too many will fatigue it. I don't think more of the same is going to get more new people. Just tweaking the same might, but I think it will fatigue it.
Yeah, and I agree with Steve. Like, it depends on what the intent of the new editions are, because I know it's not really exactly tabletop, like you have a Games Workshop constantly releasing new editions. Were all those editions in a short period of time required? Probably not. But I can lead to a lot of fatigue. Like, I do think you want to let your each edition sort of find its feet, for lack of a better term. So you shouldn't constantly be pumping out new editions, especially if it's only minimal changes. A new edition is not required necessarily if you're just tweaking a few things here or there.
Yeah, I think I'm of the same mind because they had a few free things that people picked up. Like I think Wendy sponsored some stuff. Like people played them for the memes and things, and those are generally well received. But people sometimes are like, oh, here's another book, here's another $60, $80, $90. And they're like, ah, it's a lot.
Yeah, especially if they're not backwards compatible, like we talked about. Then it's total fatigue. Then you're pissed when it starts affecting your wallet, right? That's a different thing. So, how important do you think game balance is? Like, do you feel with the new edition it's necessary to redesign or balance character classes when they drop a new edition? Or is balance not too important, and as long as they have more of the other things, more fluff, more classes, more feats, whatever? Like, what do you think is better? Like, more pumping out more content or game balance, or do you want it all? Do you want all the things?
I'm not really a big balance person. Like I wouldn't derail a game to like go pick flowers, but I also don't like really need to throw out big damage. Like as long as I can help the team in a way that feels meaningful, I'm good. But sometimes like I've played a class where I'm just like, oh, like I am face down in the dirt 90% of the time. So either I've done this wrong or it's weak or like I'll go get some insight from someone. So like I don't want to be bringing down the team, but I'm okay being weak personally, but I don't know that that's everybody's playstyle.
So that said, if you feel like, say, a couple classes in there are out of balance and are too weak or too powerful, do you think that justifies a new edition? Or would you rather see erratas come out where they just make changes?
I think it would depend on the extent of the changes. Like, when it comes to game balance, I'm not too worried about the players, like one player's being a bit more powerful than the other if that's how it's designed. But like, if a class, or archetype, whatever game you're playing, seems to be inherently flawed, for lack of a better term, like maybe on its initial conception, and then after it's been played for a few years, there's a noticeable lack of what's the word I'm looking for?
Interest or people playing it?
Yes, like that. There's a lot of similar complaints. I think the prime example for me, if we're talking about D&D, is the initial base ranger. The initial features of the base ranger are very specific and have minimal impact. A lot of them, like ranger is a class that everyone's familiar with. You're thinking you're strider, you want to play like a beastmaster, go out, like fight, like be the survivalist. But a lot of the base rangers in 5th editions were very flavor based, and you had to be in a very specific terrain, and if you weren't in your specific terrain or tracking a certain type of creature, you effectively don't have class features. So say you want to say, oh, I want to make sure my character is very efficient with tracking the woods. You bring this character and the majority of your campaign happens in the frozen wilds. Guess what? That's an entire feature of your class you don't get. Now, they did change this with additional supplements before a new edition was released, adding in some new optional content to really make that, because they sort of addressed and knew that was a concern of a lot of players. They tried to offset it with stronger subclass features, but eventually they did add in brand new replaceable features. from what I've seen so far, the new edition, those optional features they added years later have been added to the base design to replace those less than ideal features. So that's one example. So initially, they did not require a new edition, just did it through supplements, but the new edition did allow them a better base. Because a new edition, I think, should be a great starting point for any new players in the game. So right now, with the new edition, if they've got those better features in, someone new coming into the game only needs the player's handbook to have access to those features. They don't need the supplements from day one because a year ago, if someone wants to play that better ranger, they need the base book and they need the supplement. So I think that's a good incentive for additions if you have a lot of cases like that.
Yeah, a lot of supplements that people got to pull upon in order to get a class balanced or to get it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, then I can see that be a problem.
But I think anybody can, min max a character if they think about it enough, or just simply have a conversation with their DM before. Is this going to be a winter campaign? Because I was thinking about making a forest ranger. Well, I'm probably going to switch that up. But if you really just want to play a character based on, I'm the forest ranger, I don't care where we go, you are going to lose class features. But that's really up to you.
All right, I'm skipping a few questions I had because we've covered some of these already in our general chit chat when we go slightly off there. But here's another one. Do you think there's a point where old editions become too difficult or too easy for the players, and that would be a natural cue for a new edition? So, like, either the game that can be difficult to learn, or it could just be difficult level. So, for example, like I'm thinking like older D&D, first, second edition, super deadly, right? And character has got only a couple little hit points. You get hit once, twice, you're down, you're dead, whatever, right? And then as editions evolve, and then it got kind of like it might get easier for the player to survive, but it also might get harder to understand all the rules because now instead of just being an elf wizard with 2 spells, you're now an elf subclass, this, that, 20 feats, all these skills, and you've got a big complex character sheet as opposed to a little stat card, right? So there's like a balance there. What do you guys think? What do you think about that?
I think one of the primary reasons for a new edition should be it should be designed as a great jumping on point. Uh, so, like as we sort of mentioned ago, like if the amount of supplements you need to really play like an archetype or class efficiently, um, if you require several of them, great time to put into a new edition. At the same time, if you have someone who prefers the old edition, nothing is stopping you from playing that. So, I think it's good to make enough changes in the new edition um, to make it a bit more complex or simple, depending on what you feel is going to attract more players.
You touched on one of my next questions there, but I'll let everyone else answer before, and then I'll segue into that in a moment. You guys have any input on that?
I think some people really get attached to the characters they make and they don't want to see them die. So a system where they can keep their one player and grow him and evolve him as a character, not just stats wise, but in RP as well. That makes people drawn to it. Whereas some people are just in it for the game, and if a character dies, I'll roll a new character. It doesn't matter. I'm just here to play, here to fight, here to roll dice.
Mm-hmm.
So if your team is I think maybe the DM kind of has to judge the team that they're playing with based on what their feelings are.
Yeah.
I don't know. For me, I think that the challenge with the additions is some like in a home game, how many times do you stop because someone's like, it doesn't work that way, it does work that way. Like for me personally, I'm like, I will make a ruling now. We can get into the nitty-gritty about it later and like figure it out, but like we don't want to derail play to like get into the rules. So I think one condensed version of kind of everything is hopefully a new kind of blank slate to be like, we can go to this one book if we need to when we're going to research the answer, but like not get hung up on it so you're spending 20 minutes out of game rather than like having that experience that you're trying to have with your friends.
Yeah. And I think a good example of this is why Shadow Dark came out about a year ago or whatever, and why it was so successful, right? Like, I mean, D&D, it basically started off kind of like hardcore, and it's evolved the way it has. And then there was suddenly, this many years later, they Kelsey over there realized, there's a group of players that want a high death chance dungeon crawl game, like old school Dungeons and Dragons. So she creates this new, very simplified kind of D&D game, and puts it out, makes 1 point something million, and it won 4 awards there, Game of the Year, and all this kind of stuff, right? So there's a player base that's just like, you know what, D&D is getting away from what I want. And a lot of those players might be older generations of players that were just like, or they might be the type where they want to sit down and they want every combat to be like, oh, are we going to live through it, or are we going to have a player death? Because there's people like that, right? Like I said in streams I've watched of Shadowdark, literally every combat there's a player death. And then there's TPKs, for like 3 TPKs in one dungeon. And I'm like, some people, that's a huge turnoff, and I get it, because it's just like, man, we can't get invested into the game. But at the same time, there's people, those players kept coming back, and they liked it. So it really, I guess it depends, right? That's a whole nother video as well, I guess, technically.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, as long as players know what they're getting into, because you don't want to, think like you're playing a high fantasy, very character-driven game, like plot out like, oh, here's a character to play, and then like you're going into a meat grinder game like Shadowdark can be, and your character gets killed off in the first session. I mean, if like your GM during session 0 says this is going to be a very tough game, death is very real, then at least you can sort of know that when you're creating your initial or tertiary characters.
Like
what happens when they survive? I mean, you go into Shadowdark, you get a TPK. Okay, that's what I was told by the DM. I expected it. And then your second character lives, and then you do another mission and he lives, and then your third mission he lives. Now you're like, okay, now this guy means a lot to me. He's survived. He has all this gear. Now I don't want him to die, which is the very real case of the Shadowdark game that we're invested in. But
yeah.
I'm prepared for it.
Yeah, I let you all know up front.
How does it feel?
I was like, your backgrounds just have like 1 or 2 sentence backgrounds, because I'm like, the system is deadly. I didn't want you wasting time coming up with this complex character you get attached to. I was like, get attached to him a little later, like especially in the first couple sessions, because I mean, like as you've seen, like you guys still got your characters now at level 3 in Shadowdark, but Johnny just died, so now he's a level 1 wizard with 1 hit point. Whereas Nick, your character is like a fighter with 20 something hit points, so you have
like my character's an absolute tank.
So you have 20 times the HP of Johnny's character. So Johnny's character, if he walks out, I'm like, roll dex to see if you slip and fall down the hill. If he fails, and he's dead. And it's like, what a different system, right? So, anyways, but that's what I like about it, and that's like, whatever. But as I said, you hinted at the next question when you said, like, if you like an older edition, just stick with it and play with it instead of playing the new edition. But the thing is, do you feel the players are forced to jump on the bandwagon of a new edition, and is it feasible to play old editions? Because my experience has been, a lot of players will say, you know what, I don't like the changes, especially in Warhammer again, but they're like, I don't like all these changes, I'm sticking with the current edition. And they kind of do that out of protest, but they all end up caving in and getting into the new edition because all their friends are doing it, all the content coming out for it is doing it, and a lot of people don't want to take the time to like convert things if the system requires it. I just feel like most people have the fear of missing out, and they just want to jump on the bandwagon regardless. What do you guys think?
What I've read online about other people complaining about finding groups and DMs and games to play, I'm always lucky that I have a constant game and a constant DM. So for me, if they decide they're upgrading, it's like, maybe I don't want to, maybe I do, but I'm going to do it anyway because I want my constant game and I just want to keep playing with my friends. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and if you're someone who plays with different groups, because I mean, like, we do have a dedicated like player group that we play with, but that's not the case for everyone, especially with online gaming. If you're looking for a group, the latest edition is what you're mostly going to find. You may find like some, like 3.5 is still very popular in different groups, but if I'm going to go play a D&D game, I'm going to find at minimum 90% people are going to be looking for 5e or the 2024 5e, and maybe 10% or less is going to be for that 3.5. So while they exist and you still play it, it depends on your group. If you have a dedicated player group that's already playing an older edition, you can just keep playing that. But if you're out looking for a new group, most people will probably be looking for the new edition because it's easier to get into and the material is easier to find. Because especially with older editions, like really old editions of games, it may be nigh impossible to find like even digital copies of old rules. People want to find what's easy and accessible. So whatever's the easiest to find, either in a bookstore or online, is what they're going to play.
Well, I'll just get to my last question before we dive into just discussing the new D&D, some of the top 10 D&D changes for the new edition. My last question, you can make it short if you want, because we kind of touched on it, but I don't think anyone specifically answered it. How long should a game go before a new edition is needed? Do you think there's a particular amount of years that would make people happy? Or is it just time and years is irrelevant and it's just a matter of if the edition needs it or not? What do you think? I would say like no sooner than 5 years for me. 5 to 8 is what I would like. Because, I mean, 5 is technically the Alien RPG now, and honestly, you know how fast time goes. It goes by like, and I feel like I just bought that game. It feels to me like I bought the game 2 years ago. Like, that's how it feels, even though it's been 5, because time blurs together. So I feel like I haven't even picked up all the expansion books for it yet, and they're like, new edition. I'm like, oh, crap. I was too busy playing Tiny Supers and some other fantasy games, and I'm like, yeah, I'm definitely gonna get to that Alien RPG real soon, as soon as I can. And then it's just like, but when you get in the campaign and it takes like a year, then you're done. You're like, what? Time flies. But I don't know. I think 5 to 7 maybe. What do you guys think?
I think 5 to 7 is really good. That was the number I had in mind. Now, that's ideally. Now, I think I'd be more forgiving if a game has a shorter time frame between its first and its second edition, because a first edition, even though there's been a certain amount of playtesting, once it's out there and it's open to a wider audience, that's when some cracks may form. So for a first edition to second edition of a new system, I would be thinking maybe even 3 years would be an appropriate time frame. It's been out there, people have tested it, you'd be able to see what works, what doesn't, and the second edition should improve on that with very minimal changes, just sort of streamline the experience. But after that, I think 5 to 7 is the best period.
Players will find cracks in your system. See, you can play test all you want, but when you throw it out to 10,000 people, and then suddenly you're just like, this combos with this, and then suddenly you can, one-shot anybody, and you're like, oh, great, here we go. If you make a paladin rogue or whatever combo, and you're doing 1,000 damage. But yeah, go ahead, guys. Did you have anything to say on that?
I was like, my math on that time frame is way off because for me it depends on how long your campaign is. Which if you average a year for a campaign, if you're playing casually, based on how many characters and subclasses that you've yet to try. So I guess 50 to 100 years. I don't know because I'll never get through everything I want to play.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. So, Steve, based on that, it sounds like if you feel like an edition is good and it's not broken or unbalanced, you'd be happy with it staying at that edition and just keep coming out with new stuff?
If we were still working with the original 5e Player's Handbook and they never released anything else, I'd want another class in 5 years. Easy. Another edition in 4 to 5. But every time they put out another book, there's 5 subclasses for each thing, or 3 subclasses for each class, and I'm like, all right, I got to play that one and that one and that one. Now I know I'm only going to play this guy for maybe a half a year to a year. Maybe I'll get into 2 campaigns. All right, and then I get that map going across the screen where I'm trying to think. I need to play everything. There's not enough time, and now there's another edition.
Yeah. What were you, Kate?
So if it's backwards compatible, maybe 5 to 7. But if it's not, never.
I like it.
I think when you start to have to dig out too many things in character creation, I think if after you're looking at 4 or 5 books, 4 or 5 supplements, I think that's just too much to put on a new player, and it's too much to probably negotiate on your day to day. So based on how books come out, sometimes that could be a year, but I really would like to see maybe a new edition every, I was kind of later than you guys, maybe 6 to 10 years. But again, I I think that you can amalgamate stuff to make it easier for people, and that'll be fine. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. I just, don't want to buy 30 books and 38 more books.
Yeah, and my last point on that is, like, I don't think D&D or many RPGs have much errata, do they? Other than like typos and minor little tweaks. Whereas I know like Warhammer, it's literally the book comes out, and a week after, it's like, here's the errata. Everything like powers change, stat lines change, and you're just like, what? And then it's constantly like every couple months you're like, oh, more erratas, and errata just keeps growing because of all the mistakes and game balance. And I find that annoying, and so I'm glad RPGs don't do that much, so you don't have to be constantly looking up errata, and like you're trying to play a ranger and you're just like, actually it was errated, Hunter's Mark works this way, because then you're just like, oh, but I got the book here, I want to read what it's in the book I bought, right? Whereas you can't do that in 40k. You literally got to have your iPad there with all the erratas for everybody's army and every rule book, and you're just like, this is bullshit. Drives me nuts. So I found a website, DungeonsandDragonsFan.com, and they happen to list the 10 biggest D&D 2024 changes. And I actually don't know much about it. I watched like a couple of little videos on it, so I know a couple little things, but I haven't got into it, and I plan to purchase it now on the 17th for Foundry, and then I'll have it all inputted, and then I'll be able to read through it then and have access to it for my games. I don't know if I'm going to buy the physical book or not. I might just read it all in the program. I love physical books, but I have to admit the last 3 D&D books I bought, I haven't opened them. So they're literally over there on the shelf, and I haven't opened them. So I'm like, do I really need the physical copy? I'd rather just have it all electronic in the program, so it's at my fingertips and I don't have to do countless hours of data entry. Anyways, I'm getting off topic. All right, so let's get into it. So this person says, number 10, content has been reorganized. While it might seem like a small change, the new Player's Handbook has been structured in a significant way. It has a more beginner-friendly approach that starts with the basics of how to actually play the game, something that was missing in the 2014 edition. And it begins with instructions on character creation. And it introduces a more streamlined approach with advice on how to make a D&D character, with sample character sheets, labeling it to make it easier for first-time players to understand what is going on. So, yeah, what do you guys think of that? Do you think that's a pretty good change? Probably is, right? It might be a bit more bloat for most people who are experienced with RPGs, but then again,
yeah, I feel that's going to be a gloss over if you've played for years, but it's a great thing for new players who are trying to learn, and it's not as intimidating when they give you the how-tos if you're trying to pick up with a new game, new set of players.
do you guys find when you're like watching Critical Role or something and they get a new player come in who's never played D&D and they sit down, they're like, what's my what now? Roll my what? And they're like totally confused as to what's a stat again? And that kind of stuff. Like those kind of players, it would definitely could help just to hand them the book and say, just read this page before tonight. And it might have all the little arrows pointing to the character sheet explaining what different things are. But I could see it being helpful.
Yeah, especially, there's nothing wrong with that, because, sort of touched on it earlier, that new editions should be designed to be jumping on points for new players in the game. So you want to design your book that assume this person has never played a tabletop RPG before. So while maybe a gloss over for more experienced players, having it all there and what's expected and to make the process as quick and easy as possible is always a good thing.
Yeah, like we're onboarding generally like one new player a year with my games, so it's great to this will be great for them, because sometimes you're like, what do you want to play, and taking it so far out of the book to be just how would you like to do damage is sometimes hard for people, but if they could go through, they could maybe pick it themselves in a way that didn't feel like I was like, here, read this book.
I find every time I buy a new RPG book, I actually enjoy reading. You ever notice the first thing they say is what is a role-playing game, or what that kind of thing. I like reading it because a lot of games describe it differently. Like in Vampire the Masquerade, it describes it differently, say, than D&D. Vampire goes on more about the theater of it, and the almost the acting of it all is more emphasized, I found, than say a D&D one. It's do you want to be a hero and slay dragons and have strength scores and stuff like that? So I get a kick out of reading those intro chapters. All right, and it is mentioned the crowning jewel of the new Player Handbook. There's apparently a rules glossary at the back of the book, which is a significant upgrade from the 2014, making it a lot quicker and easier to find important rules at the table. So I don't know what that's going to look like, but that sounds good, I suppose, for people who like to look up rules mid-session. Now, this is a
I
big
don't remember
one.
struggling too much with the different rules, but I do know that the 2014 Player's Handbook, I have I think 25 tabs, like just stuck on the pages for the most important things in sections of the book, just for quick reference. But yeah, definitely a boon if you've got that better organized.
I found the other day I had to look up something in the back of the book while I was writing an adventure. And I looked it up, and I forget what it was, but it was like encumbrance or something. And I look it up, and it's like, see, wait. And you go over, see, wait. It's like, see this. And I'm like, come on now. Like,
I
already
remember
took the
that when I
time
first got the book.
to find
Yeah,
it.
there's a few like that.
And you're like, why couldn't you just put the page number, like, see this on page whatever? See encumbrance on page 10 instead of telling me to go find encumbrance and look up where the page number is. I'm like, ah. And especially the font size in that is like, what, 4 in the back of the player handbook? It's like, what? I know we're getting old, win. Anyway, number 9. This one excites me because I plan to work this into my current D&D session. And I'm glad you're coming out with some rules for it. So, new crafting rules. So, which allows players to make their own weapons and items. The core idea behind the change is that each tool now has something known as a utilize action, which tells how it can be used in crafting and other situations. So he gives an example. Using cobbler's tools can be used to make shoes, but when combined with an investigation check, they can also be used to track an individual by footprints. Each tool has also tied to one ability score, which also allows you to add your proficiency bonus if you're proficient with that tool. And then additionally, you gain advantage on ability checks you make that use both the skill and the tool that you're proficient with. There's a lot of words there, but that's different.
I do like that because one thing I really liked, and one of the first major supplements for 5e, or at least first I can think of, was the Xanathar's Guide to Everything. That included a section on all the different tools and different ways to use them. Like, here's different checks you can associate with this. Here's some things you can make potentially. And the way it was designed is sort of optional. So it sounds like they've sort of incorporated that into the base rules now and sort of fleshed it out a bit more. And I liked that aspect because before then, you would see all these different toolkits that you can get, but the game never gave you what you actually use them for outside of something narrative. But now applying mechanics to it, makes it a little bit more engaging.
Yeah. Very interesting with the cobblers and like using it for tracking. You'd be like, hey, I make shoes for a living. Why can't I combine this with my skills and be better at tracking people, or at least, or even if like detective work, right? He's a size 10, or what size shoe was that guy that I met, or something. Because I'm sure if you design shoes for a living and you met people in a fancy ball, you'd probably be checking out people's feet, right? Without it being weird, I guess.
I think
Just
it's
find a way for it to make sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a great invitation to make a choice and then be able to actually use it. Like sometimes you pick a background, you're like, ooh, I think this background goes good with the class I want to play. And sometimes it's not, oh, this is something that my character did and this is, how they see the world because of their upbringing. Like our most recent characters, mine is little jagged, little street kids, so that plays into more how I want to play that character. So that particularly appeals to the way I like to play games.
Yeah.
I like the idea of crafting. I find, depending on the time frame and the resources, collecting it's always been very difficult in many RPGs unless your DM gives you a lot of downtime. Like you're going to be in this town for a month. What do you do? And then, okay, I craft. But other than that, unless they have some more expedient way to craft, having a different option to use the tools is always nice.
Yeah, like one thing I might do in my game is I might do the occasional short downtime time pass. Once I get a crafting system built, I was going to build my own crafting system, but now I'm going to wait to see what the new rules came out with first. But say, for example, I do create a crafting system where you need X amount of scales, leathers, whatever, from certain creatures. If I'm like, okay, guys, you got 3 days of downtime, what do you want to do? And then I'm going to we're going to jump it, but you just quickly explain to me. And then if you say, I want to go out and hunt that creature for that stuff, I might make a few rolls based on your skills, see how well you hunted them, and we'll just determine, did you successfully hunt them? So, because we can't role play out, Steve, you going off hunting while all the other players are just there like waiting around, right? That'd be too long. All right, so then it says in that as well, using the new rules, players will be able to craft potions, spell scrolls, weapons, and armor. Additional rules for crafting magic items will also be included in the Dungeon Master Guide that comes out later. So, like, that's going to be interesting. So the players can literally say, "I want to build my own sword," and there might be rules in there for it now. So that's exciting.
Spell scrolls. That'd be fun.
Yeah, I like that it's rules, but I am curious to see how much time it takes away from the actual narrative. Like, if you're playing a game, like Steve said, that there's lots of downtime, great. But, if you're playing a game where it's constant go, 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 the most downtime you'll have might be 2 or 3 days. Might not be practical to do that. But I love the fact they have it there.
Yeah, I think you need to either, if you got a lot of players and it's that type of game where you're on an adventure and you're trying to do whatever, you kind of either got to say time jumps, like I said, what do you want to do? A downtime, pass by it real quick, let them collect some reagents that they need. Or you got to make like shops selling it. So you travel and you're like, what's required to make this particular potion? And in each town you go in, you're just like, quickly, I'm going to run over to the shop. And you check out the shop and say, do you happen to have this, this, or this? Oh, you got one of the three? I'll take it. And then you eventually collect the pieces, so you're not slowing down the campaign. But by the second or third town, you're like, hey, I got enough to make the potion of invisibility now, and then you craft it yourself, which, is kind of cool. And it's like, but like you said, you can't derail a campaign to go out hunting unless everybody wants to do that, All right, number 8, minor rules changes. Okay. Drinking potions bonus action. Well, everybody's always wanted it, and everybody plays that way pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that it's an official rule because it was one of those like home rules that everyone used.
Pretty much, yeah. And it was always like into session 0, it's just like, are we doing it? Of course we are. All right. Exhaustion has been simplified from the 2014 rules. Don't know what that means, but I guess maybe they don't have all the tiers and different levels of exhaustion. Maybe it's just one level? Well, I don't know. That seems weird. I wonder how they simplified it.
Once again, hard to comment on without seeing how it is, because, you guys have become a bit familiar with exhaustion in my game. I threw a lot of exhaustion at you in a short period of time. That's how you deal with high-level D&D. But I don't think it was ever too complex. I think it was just keeping track of what each level does. So I'm curious how it's simplified, because I never found it too difficult.
I find, like, everybody knows 1, and most people know 1 or 2. But as soon as you get past 2, you don't know. Like, even in Critical Role, the episode, I'm like a couple months behind on it, but I watched the other day, and they were like, somebody was at like 3rd or 4th level exhaustion, and they were all like, what? We've never had that. What do we do? And they're like, so then it's a matter of getting the book out. So maybe that's why they're addressing it, but it's just one of those things where if it doesn't come up enough and people got to look into book, maybe that's why they're changing it. I don't know. Surprise is now much easier to implement and impacts only initiative rolls.
Okay. I think that's a good change, because I think the surprise was always a bit debatable. The rules were never clear on it, and I think every time a surprise round came up in a game, it always stopped to like, okay, how do we do this? Who's acting there? So if they streamlined that process, I think that's good.
Then they'd have to also update things like the weapons of warning, things that eliminate surprise from people. So yeah, I would like to know what that's all about.
Yeah, because like even I think like the assassin rogue relies on surprise actions a lot too. So how that sort of feeds into that. I think that's one thing you got to be careful when you change like one mechanic. How does that mechanic sort of trickle down into features from like other like classes and spells or whatnot? Like how does it actually affect the overall game? So, curious to see.
It might be the first dividing line rule you've mentioned, like, where people are either going to like it or not like it.
Yeah, true. Then it says inspiration has been updated to be more impactful option, now known as heroic inspiration. There was a link. A primary difference is that a player can now use their inspiration to reroll any roll in the game. Could be a saving throw, an attack, ability check, or even roll of a hit dice. In other words, anytime a dice is rolled and they don't like the outcome, they can use inspiration. So it's for any dice, so that could be for anything that you do, any kind of weird spell that might get you to roll dice, like, mirror image or whatever, where you make multiple images of yourself and that kind of thing. Remember, that had a D20 roll, so maybe you could use inspiration to affect, no, you hit my illusion instead of me. Like, you know what I'm saying? That's what it sounds like. But it
So a
says
little bit more impactful, I think.
Yeah, because I think inspiration could be used on a lot already. I think.
Any
I don't know,
D20 roll is what we were
yeah, that's
using
what
it
I
on,
thought.
unless we've been playing it wrong all this
I
time.
think that's how we've been doing it. I don't know if it's the correct way or not,
I
but
guess apparently it was a big deal, and we were maybe playing it wrong. It does say here though that there's also a new mechanic on how players earn heroic inspiration in other ways. So you can get it in game in other ways. For example, a new champion subclass, which is a type of fighter subclass, has an ability called Heroic Warrior that grants heroic inspiration at the start of a turn if they don't already have it. Wow. Heroic Warrior. It
A
grants the
class
character.
feature that gives inspiration.
Yeah, it has
that's
a
interesting.
Heroic Warrior.
That's
Just
very
At the
interesting.
start of your turn, you don't have inspiration, you get it. That sounds pretty powerful. I don't know what that's about.
Well, yeah, because I mean, inspiration. The way I've utilized it in my games is that like, if your character does something that I find inspiring and makes a big impact, or just that you guys have played your characters in a really neat way or overcome a huge obstacle, you get some inspiration. And I like to sort of dole it out. It's a sort of use it or lose it. So you guys can just sort of like burn through it, so I can reward you more. Like try to give it every few sessions. But having it like a mechanic, like where you get it each round, I guess if you can now use it on attack damage rolls or something, that might be why. Or yeah,
It reminds
hard to
me.
comment without seeing the wording.
It reminds me of like in Shadowdark, luck is a lot like inspiration, and there are classes in Shadowdark where like the Bard can inspire you as well and keep getting your luck back. And then there was also like different classes in there that I don't know, like you can just keep granting luck back to your team, which is kind of the same thing here. Like there might be classes that are just like you get inspiration, and just everybody's gonna be re-rolling all over the place. So maybe it won't be bad, but maybe I don't know. Too many
Yeah, like I'm
re-rolls.
still thinking of like a class feature, just giving yourself inspiration right now for the current 5e. That just seems crazy, but curious to see how it plays out.
Well, I like that they've already done something with the champion subclass, though, because right now, that was one of the first subclasses I played in 5e, and it's pretty plain. There wasn't much to it.
It's too vanilla. Like
But
it's good. Like it's a great like if you're not sure what to play, this has some great basic features that aren't too complicated. But like it's too simple for its own good, in my opinion.
who knows? That might be the new OP class, getting a free reroll every turn for anything, saving throws, anything, like every turn.
I mean, you've also got players that roll real bad. Like, there is a player who can benefit from this just because 50% of their rolls are under 5.
Are you speaking about yourself from experience?
I mean, sometimes, yeah, sometimes I don't roll over 5, and that's fine.
So you're like, I'm gonna make this new type of heroic fighter who also has halfling luck. So you're re-rolling ones and you're re-rolling other things. You're like,
That's too far.
Like-
You know what? Like, giving me a shot to, like, not fall in my face when I'm doing something cool, I'm about it.
all right. Then it says new and updated spells. So the D&D rules have some major changes to the way magic works. In fact, the new spell chapter in the Player Handbook is over 100 pages and features nearly 400 spells. While many of the existing spells are largely unchanged, there have been a number of revisions, such as counterspell has been changed to make it far less powerful. There's also a number of new spells, such as, what is this? Yolandi's Regal Presence, which essentially creates a psychic barrier around you. Oh, interesting. And then it says, spell level progression has also changed for some classes, such as Warlock, which gains more invocations at earlier levels. There's also been some semantic changes. For example, the Wizard has done away with using the term school in favor of a simpler title. So, for example, the School of Evocation subclass from 2014 is now known as the Invoker, or Evoker. So, I don't know. What do you think of that?
An evoker is still a school of evocation. That doesn't wow me at all.
Yeah, but like changing how like certain spells work, which I had heard that they had made some changes to counterspell, but I have not done a comparison to the two yet, so I am
got
curious.
rid of Mind Sliver.
Mm-hmm.
Do you guys think counterspell is overpowered? I mean, I find it's I always found it to be one of those spells which is frustrating for either the player or the GM, because like you wait for your turn to come around, you're like, oh, I'm gonna pop my big spell now. I get one 6th level spell, I'm about to use it, and it's just like boom, counterspell. and you're just like, no, and you know what I'm saying? And it's like a
Yeah.
big, it's like a shutdown. Imagine it's almost like, I guess it would be like if you could use a reaction to when a or fighter goes to attack, being like paralyzed, you know, and you're like, but I got 3 attacks I can do. No, paralyzed, you know, and there's nothing you can do about it. Like that's kind of the way it would still feel. You're like, oh, I'll pass my turn. But I get it. It's a cool spell in regards. It also balances the game a bit too, I guess, and it is kind of
Yeah,
cool.
Yeah, I think Counterspell, once again, I'm coming in 2014 edition because I haven't read the details for the 2024. I think it's strong. I don't know if it's used overpowered, but it's something that you always need to keep top of mind when you're, as a game master, like if your players have access to it, if you have NPCs that have access to it, make sure of it, or if you're a player, just being mindful if there's a spellcaster, making sure you have your reaction ready. So I think it's something that its presence is always felt, whether anyone is in the party has counterspell enough, it's something you always need to consider. And especially if you're a GM and you throw out a counterspell to the player and they just spent like their highest level spell slot that spell goes with, it doesn't feel good, but it does make it a little bit more challenging. So I mean,
I think too many classes had access to it. I think if
yeah.
less classes had it, like counter spell should be a wizard thing, in my opinion, because a wizard would know how to counter a spell. A bard, maybe, but that's not really what they're designed to do. Sorcerers, that's all innate magic. It's just one of those things. And towards end levels, when a wizard has a bucket of first level spells that they're not spending because they're going to be firing out their big stuff, they're just throwing them out all the time. But if every class, if you got 3 spellcasters on a field and everybody has a counterspell, that's where it gets a little out of hand. I counterspell, but I counterspell the counterspell, but I counterspell the counterspell the counterspell.
Yeah.
Too
Spell
much.
conga line.
Yeah.
There's been a few clutch moments in Critical Role, like, where it's just like people just like counterspell, like Sam would shout out counterspell, or like Liam or whatever, and it would just be like, whoa, because it's like game changing. The big bad is about to do something crazy, like I'm teleporting out of here to escape, and they're like counterspell, and then suddenly you're like, what? Or vice versa, right? Like the players are trying to do something crucial. But yeah, go ahead.
But big bads also have legendary actions. So now you're balancing a bit with they can do this extra stuff, legendary saves, legendary actions after turns. Yeah, well then a player can use a counterspell at that level and it makes sense. But
yeah,
I don't know. They must have thought a lot about the balance for that.
So yeah, we could talk about counterspell, the whole video on counterspell.
Next podcast, counterspell.
Yeah. All right, so we'll try to go over these quick. Changes to D&D classes. They just got like a couple sentences for like one sentence for each class, just to summarize a couple dramatic things. So it says the new rules for all the classes have been changed. Some of these are dramatic, such as the Paladin and the Monk, while others are relatively minor, like Bard and Cleric. Here's some of the biggest changes. So it says the Barbarian, the way Rage works, has been updated to make it more flexible and easier to use and recover, with options to now use Rage outside of combat. Because that's always good. You always get the Barbarian wanting to Rage to break down doors or doing a like out of combat scene, and it's always like, but I gotta be hitting myself or hitting something else, and you're like, do you really need to be? Kind of. I found that like it takes you out a little bit. I'd rather just Rage lasts X amount of time, or I don't know. Or maybe like Rage lasts for X amount of rounds, but if you're in combat, it continues as long as you're hitting something. Like have that second line that's like works the way it used to, but have a little bit of out of combat rule. I don't know. What do you think?
An out of combat rage would be fun.
Yeah, because I think D&D is a very combat heavy game. Like at least the 2014 version, a lot of the rules are based around combat. So I think it's great if you can take some of those mechanics that are usually exclusive to combat to bring it outside of that. So that way, if you're not in a fight, you still have some cool things that your character can do.
Bard, in addition to enhanced magical abilities, Bardic Inspiration has also been updated to make it easier to use and recover. All right, so bards are going to be throwing out more inspiration. That's always good. Everybody likes having a bard on their team, right?
Bards are my favorite class.
Oh, they are? I didn't know that.
Yep.
Cleric, new Divine Order and Channel Divinity features have been added, along with new options to turn and destroy undead. Oh, that's cool. I always want clerics to be able, any kind of cleric or priest kind of class, like that needs to be their thing, right? Like turn undead, and now they've got new options to turn or destroy undead. Should be fun.
I always thought turn undead was a little weak unless you were going in against a pile of skeletons or something. I would like to see a turn undead that affects like a roll to affect any undead, not just at certain levels. Like it might be a harder roll to make it happen, but it would happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that'd be great because it's such a cool feature because when you use it, it's always an awesome moment when it actually goes off. But just having that happen a bit more often or have a chance to happen more often, unlike stronger enemies, I think would be a great change. Don't know if that's what they're doing, but I'd like to see it.
I think, yeah, like if it's like, if they're under challenge rating, whatever, they turn to ash. If they're above that, I don't know, they cower in fear or they're shackled or I don't know, you know what I mean? Blinded by your radiant light or, like have some effect. You don't need to shatter them, but you could still like have it like, oh, this is a high challenge rating Lich King or something that like let it still do something. I think that would be cool. Even if it just delays your turn or something, Druid, the class-specific wild shape feature has been significantly changed, and druids now have enhanced combat and spellcasting abilities. Wait now. Druid is like the most OP class in the game, and now they're saying they have enhanced combat and spellcasting abilities. I wonder what that means. What do you guys think about that?
Hard to comment on without seeing it. I mean, druids, like, for the longest time, I don't know about currently, but I know, like, before there were a lot of supplements and extra subclasses, the Moon Druid from 2014 was always considered one of the more powerful and versatile characters you can make. So I'm curious to see, if they sort of lean into that or tone it down. But yeah, I know that was originally the case.
Isn't it at level 20 if you're a certain type of druid, it's like you can shape change into a dragon, and then as soon as the form is destroyed, you can just do it again and keep doing it, and there's no end to it?
Yeah, that's the
Unlimited
druid.
wild shapes.
Yeah. Like, but I mean, a lot of level 20, though not all features tend to be pretty crazy, but no one ever reaches level 20.
But that one just sounds like, crazy, because it's like you gain 200 hit points and all these abilities, and then as long as they can't one round you when you snap out of that form or subdue you or whatever, then you're like, well, I'm a dragon again. I don't know. Maybe they'll balance
well, actually,
that out.
it's funny enough because I mean, years ago when Critical Role did a battle royale, Keyleth always won as a druid because no one could ever take her down. They had to have one round, and if they didn't defeat her one round, she'd turn into an elemental and have full HP. So, like, yeah, but that's high-end play. So, I mean, like, I don't like to judge a class by its high-end features. I look at, like, the first 10 levels to see how effective a class is.
Yeah.
I don't even read the high-end features on most classes when I'm deciding what I'm building. 10 to 12, that's as high as I look at.
In addition to the new weapon mastery system, the rules introduce tweaks to fighting styles, a number of new combat features. Okay, so fighters are getting some tweaks. Monks' key points are now known as focus points. Monks' weapons have been changed, and Stunning Strike has been significantly nerfed.
No.
What do you think of that?
Yeah, like, I know one thing of that you've mentioned, because apparently, not regarding the monk, but regarding the fighting styles, apparently fighting styles are now a type of feat. So, like, when you have a class that has a fighting style, like your ranger, your fighter, your paladin, you more or less pick from a specific list of feats. I think that's the change they've made. I don't know how much that changes the overall impact or character build, but...
I'll spit out a few more we can discuss. Ranger. New options have been added for magic, and Hunter's Mark spell is now a major part of the class. I read a Facebook post on that. Somebody said the new Hunters are OP, and a lot of people were arguing, saying it's not OP. But all I read, I think, was that they get an additional 2 uses of Hunter Mark or something. So it's like almost like you're going to be using Hunter's Mark more often. So.
Yeah, I've looked into that a little bit. From what I can see, they incorporated the optional features into the base class, and Hunter's Mark is a bigger feature. Like, I think you can cast Hunter's Mark without using a spell slot, but I wouldn't say it's OP because I think later on at higher levels, you get Hunter's Mark specific boosts. Like, I think at level 13, you no longer require concentration for Hunter's Mark. That's at level 13. And level 19 or 20, I can't remember offhand, the Hunter's Mark damage increases to like D10 instead. But I mean, that's nothing at level 20. That's like a pitiful level 20 feature.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No big deal. So this is, let's see, what else? Warlock spell restoration has been updated to provide more flexibility, and Eldritch invocations have been tweaked. Okay. And then, what's this? The Wizard. The number of prepared spells has been updated along with the rules for how to create, use, and replace spell books. Interesting. So that's just a little quick blurbs on those. The next section, let's see. New and updated subclasses. So it says it has 48 subclasses, including 3 brand new options. The Circle of the Sea Druid, College of Dance Bard, and Path of the World Tree Barbarian. So I'm not going to go into detail on those, but... So it sounds like 48 subclasses. Is that how many the Player's Handbook had initially? Or is that like combining a lot of stuff? It's combining a lot
I think
of stuff,
it's more...
isn't it?
Yeah, it's more balanced. The original Player's Handbook, you had some classes that had 8 subclasses and others that only had 2. From what I've seen from the new 2024 book, every class has 4 subclasses in that. So some of them are reprints from the original one, some of them are reprints from other supplements, and I think most classes, not all, have at least 1 new subclass. But all of them have 4, so they all have the same amount of options. Because I know, like, Wizard had 1 for each school of magic, but Druids only had 2 to pick from the beginning. So, I mean, it's a bit more balanced. It gives a bit more variety, no matter what you're playing from the get-go.
Yeah, it says these were the ones that were in Unearthed Arcana playtests, but now they're official, so that's cool. It's always good, too, to be like, okay, I'm playing a fighter, but then you got 4 different ways to play the fighter right out of the Player's Handbook. I think that's good, so it's not, you don't feel like every fighter's the same. Couple more things. Number 4, new weapon mastery properties. So, one major criticism with 5e is just how slow combat can be. Yes, that is one of my complaints. 2024 seeks to tackle this issue with its new weapon mastery system. These new rules allow martial classes to tap into 8 mastery properties, each of which associated with a particular ranged or melee weapon. For example, a battle axe has the cleave property, which allows you to target another nearby creature after you've made a successful attack, while a crossbow has the slow property, which allows you to reduce the target's movement speed. Okay, and then it says these mastery properties also have triggers. For example, the graze property, when you miss a creature with an attack roll, while the topple property only triggers when you hit a creature. Okay, so it's like triggered effects too. There's no limit on the number of times the mastery property can be used in the new system. Oh wow, that's different.
I'm excited
Yeah,
about
it would be.
that.
It looks interesting, but like I'd like to see how it is in practice.
Yeah, in 3.5, going back a couple years, they had things like that. You could get a whirlwind attack, but in order to get the whirlwind attack, you had to have all these steps to build up to it. You had to have the cleave attack, you had to have a rushing attack, you had to have so many prerequisites. So by the time you actually got to do the whirlwind attack, you were probably almost done your campaign. So I'm hoping it's not crazy, like hard to get the ability to do these things with your weapons.
Yeah, but depending how they space it out, it could be another thing to look forward to leveling up. It's like just another thing. It's like, oh, I can't wait to get that whirlwind attack. And it's another thing to build a character around, I guess, too, right?
I
Yes.
long thought they should bring back the whirlwind attack.
Like, how many times as a fighter have you swung a mist and you're like, okay, I'm done now?
Yeah, it's cool if it's just like, yeah, like that. Like you got a fighter be able to cleave or hamstring attacks or different things. They might be able to just add more variety to combat. I don't know why he said that. How that would speed up combat, though. Can you think of any way of adding new mastery properties would actually speed up combat? I feel like that would slow it down if you have more things to do, but I don't know.
Like, I don't know overall. I know, like, the cleave ability could speed up combat because, if you do an attack, like, you're a barbarian, you're rolling a great axe, you deal, like, 9 points of damage, but the enemy only had, like, 2 HP left. That extra damage you can put into another enemy, so that could speed things up.
Yeah.
So that's one example, but I don't know all the different mastery abilities, but that's one example.
Just kill things quicker. Yeah, that's interesting. All right, there's 3 more points left, people. hang in there. Changes to D&D feats. So, feats were an optional gameplay mechanic that you could choose to take instead of the usual ability score improvements granted when you leveled up. The only caveat was that you could only take a feat once and had to meet certain prerequisites. So in the new edition, it has changed significantly. So first and foremost, they are no longer optional and are now a built-in mechanic. They can also be selected more than once. Even more importantly, they now come in 4 different varieties. Origin feats, which are generally from your background. General feats, which are taken from level 4 and up. Fight style feats, which are gained if you have the fight style trait provided to the martial class. And epic boons, which you choose when you hit level 19. So, feats are now mandatory and built in, and you can stack them. That's going to be interesting. But
yeah, I found like most people used feats in their games anyway. I know it's technically an optional rule, but I can't think of any 5e game I've played in or heard being played that the GM didn't allow feats.
So, and now number 2, changes to D&D races. One of the most talked about changes is terminology. Yeah, they're going from race to species. That's no big deal. And in fact, the new 24 rules have removed racial ability score modifiers. So instead, you just receive your ability score bonuses from your background. So nice and simple. It's interesting. I don't know. What do you guys think about that? Like, it is tricky because I always kind of did enjoy, like, hey, I'm playing a Goliath or a dwarf, and it's like, well, they're going to naturally be stronger or tougher or have better endurance. And different races or species now have, like, different perks, right? It's only just normal. But to say that they're all the same, but I guess technically if anyone makes a Goliath, well, they're going to probably be put points in strength anyways. But I've always been a big fan of racial abilities and like each race or species being different and literally having like all these cool abilities. But stat points, I don't know how important that is to me. Kind of on the fence.
I
like
love. You go ahead, Steve.
I was just gonna say I like how they recently changed the stats to be pick 2 and 1 of anything, or 3 of anything.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say there because before they implemented that optional rule that you can just apply the points wherever, it's not tied to your race, I found that, like, for myself, I'd like to try and make a unique thing. Like, so many people want to be the Elven Archer because they had the stats for it. But if you want to play something outside of that, you felt like you were gimping your own character, like you were being suboptimal, which is a fun way to play, but other players in a group might not appreciate you picking suboptimal choices to be more narratively interesting. But removing the points, just the stat bonuses, and applying those where you want, it opens up more interesting builds. You'd be more creative. And while there can still be some abilities tied to that race that favor certain archetypes or classes more so than others, it gives you a lot more freedom. So I loved that optional change.
I mean, in part, I agree with a lot of that. Like, as long as it does kind of remove that sort of suboptimal, like you would never choose X race with X whatever because the bonuses aren't to what you want to play. So like it can give you a more distinct character. Like there's a reason why the main archetypes are the main archetypes, right? You've got your elven archer, the guys that are the guys, your dwarven barbarian. Oh, sorry, my dog. So yeah, I think it just makes more dynamic play.
Yeah, like I said, it gives you more control over your character, but I also do like the idea. I've always been a fan. I guess I'm a little different in this aspect. Like I said, I always like the aspect of being like, if you see a dwarf, you know that the average dwarf is stronger than the average human. Like, or I don't know, like the average, like, say, elf might be more intelligent than the average human because they live longer, their society is different, or more educated, blah, blah, blah. Like, I kind of like that being built into a race, but I definitely see what you're saying, because then it's just like, everyone picks the Elven Archer because you want the high dex score, or you want the high intellect score, so you're picking the wizards are always elves and never dwarves, because you're like, I don't want the con anyways, So it allows for more variety of characters, so I guess overall it's a better thing. So you can...
I could deep dive into backgrounds all day long, and I know you're not doing that, but I like the idea of being able to switch it up because now you can come up with the background. Why is your elf not as smart as other elves?
Yeah.
What happened to him? Why is your dwarf not as strong as other dwarfs? And you can feed into your own personal backstory and make why you have this wimpy little dwarf who's really good with, making things with his hands and really smart instead of really strong.
Yeah, like you make a dwarven acrobat, and you're like, what? Like you've watched Lord of the Rings, you're like, well, then again, they could hop on those barrels pretty good. But, but normally it's like Gimli stumbling all over the place. But yeah, it doesn't need to be built into races. And the very last thing before we conclude, it just says changes to D&D backgrounds. The biggest change to New Edition is undoubtedly the introduction of new backgrounds. So in the old edition, 5e, I guess, were really designed to help you flesh out your character's personality and provide only a few in-game benefits. And in the new edition, backgrounds are now an essential part of the game. While they still grant you your extra skill and tool proficiencies along with starting equipment, the biggest change is they now grant your ability score bonuses. So, and then it says there's also much more flexibility in how you assign these bonuses, with the option to increase one score by 2 points and another by 1, or increase 3 by 1. So that's kind of how we've been playing it. I guess.
Yeah, it is not tied to your race, so I'm curious to see how it's actually implemented.
And in addition, backgrounds grant you an extra feat known as the Origin feat, which will provide further in-game abilities. Notably, there are 16 backgrounds in the new rules, and so that have been ported over from the old one. That have been ported over and they've been updated. Yeah. But then they got some new ones like Farmer, Guard, Merchant, and Wayfarer are completely new backgrounds. So it's going to be even more. And that's pretty much it. So overall, I'm pretty excited. How excited are you all to get your hands on a new edition? Do you think it's due time and you're excited? Or are you just being like, meh, no, I want to be playing 5e?
I'm curious to see. Oh yeah, it got to be backwards compatible.
I'm interested to see how it's backwards compatible, since they said all these classes are going to have, I don't know, stackable feats, and backgrounds are now going to assign different things, and then like in combat you're going to have cleave attacks and these other abilities and stuff. So I guess like adventures are obviously backwards compatible, but I wonder how like stats will work. Like if you're using a stat block of like, I don't know, a bandit from 5e, but now the bandit suddenly got all these trick abilities they can do, which he didn't have before. So now how's that going to work? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think like with the backwards compatible, you sort of pick what your base is. Like, if you're using the new 2024 rules, but you can still use like the old like subclasses that haven't been reprinted and sort of balancing those out and seeing how they go together. Because there's a lot of optional subclasses that have not been reprinted in 2024, but from what they've said, it's designed that you can use them still.
Alright everybody, the next episode will be here on the screen if it's available at this time. Otherwise, if you enjoyed it, be sure to hit the like button, comment down below, let me know your thoughts on the adventure, share this with your friends if you want to help this channel grow, and as always, stay in the light.